Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the MyIBD Learning webinar series. Today's webinar will be focused on navigating eating around the holidays, and we are going to hear from expert faculty and IBD patients about coping with and managing food choices around the holiday season, learning healthy cooking techniques, identifying food substitutes when flaring or in remission, and discussing how culture affects diet and IBD. My name is Renat Last, and I am the Manager of Pediatric Education and Resources at the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. I am pleased to be facilitating this evening's program. The MyIBD Learning webinar series features different topics each month. By registering for today's webinar, you have automatically been registered for the series, which takes place on the third Thursday of each month. As a reminder, our next webinar will be taking place on Thursday, December 16th, and will be on what it means to feel well with IBD. We encourage you to explore the webinar website to learn more about our monthly programs and read about our presenters. Under the homepage, you can find different tabs where you can watch recordings of previous webinars and learn more about upcoming webinars. You can also connect to a local support group or your local foundation chapter. To learn more about the event platform, you can go to the navigation Q&A tab. If you have any questions during tonight's program, please visit the live discussion and a virtual help desk attendee will assist you. A few housekeeping reminders before we begin. All the presentations will be recorded and accessible to view after the completion of tonight's program. If you have questions for our presenters, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box at any time throughout the program. I would like to thank our event sponsors, Gilead, Janssen, Takeda, and Bristol Myers Squibb for supporting the MyIBD Learning webinar series. Their support enables the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation to continue to provide important education for our patients and caregivers. Now I would like to introduce this evening's expert faculty who will be presenting tonight. Maggie Stokel is a pediatric GI psychologist and assistant professor at the Yale Child Study Center with expertise in the treatment of youth with a variety of chronic gastrointestinal conditions, including IBD. Maggie is also a member of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation National Scientific Advisory Committee. Brittany Roman Green is an IBD specialized virtual private practice registered dietitian nutritionist, certified personal trainer, and behavior change specialist, and was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis about 20 years ago. Brittany is also a member of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation National Scientific Advisory Committee. She's the national leader of the Registered Dietitians and IBD Practice Group for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And Laura Scaviola is an ulcerative colitis patient and advocate from Connecticut. After being diagnosed in 2013, she sought ways to prioritize nourishment and symptom management with diet change and traditional medication treatments. This led her to start her food blog, Manja Paleo. Thank you all for presenting tonight. And Maggie, I'm going to pass it over to you to facilitate the rest of the evening.
Thanks, Renat. I'm just going to share my slides here. Okay, thanks again, everyone, for being here and for having me. I'm excited to hear from everyone. Laura, I'm really excited to see your demonstration, which is going to be, I think, an exciting part of the program. So I'm just going to lead off tonight with an introduction to some of the topics that we'll be discussing, and particularly in the panel discussion towards the end, we'll be able to loop back to all of these topics. So again, I'll be starting with an introduction. We'll then pass it over to Brittany, our dietitian, who will give a talk on making good choices around the holiday table. And then Laura will give a cooking demonstration, and then we'll have a panel discussion with 2 IBD patients. So in terms of the holidays, there are many emotions that can come up, some positive, some negative, and some in between. And IBD can bring a whole host of other emotions to the table. Some of them include stress, uncertainty, anxiety, hesitancy to connect with family, particularly if you're around family members you haven't seen in a while, or if your health has been unpredictable lately, if you're concerned about a flare, and you may also have some discomfort. So all of these things may make it hard to, fully engage in the holiday. Some common questions and concerns that I hear from a lot of the patients and families I work with when we're talking about preparing for the holidays are, what food will be served? And sometimes that's uncertain and can cause some anxiety for people. Will the foods fit within my IBD diet? Who will be there? Will I know everyone? Are there going to be some new people? Do I know the space where the holiday is hosted? And relatedly, will I have private bathroom access? What will that be like? And finally, will I need to talk about my IBD? And that can often come up around holidays when we're often gathering with people we haven't seen in quite some time, and people may have some, well-intentioned questions, but it can catch us off guard, and make us feel like we have a spotlight on us. I also want to bring up IBD and the overlap with culture. No matter how your family defines your culture, there's always a food component. And eating at the holidays is full of traditions. And so it brings up the question of, how do we balance our culture with our IBD needs? And what is the role of eating in your family's culture? Are there certain foods in your family's culture which tend to be triggering for your IBD? So are there foods that are typically at the Thanksgiving table, or at the holiday table that might make you feel uncomfortable or make you concerned that it's not consistent with how you've been managing your IBD? So you can think ahead and consider communicating with your family to identify substitutions or alternatives in a way that respect your values and needs. And so I bring up this topic, and I hope to talk about it more in the panel discussion, because I think it's something that is intertwined in how we all exist and how we all gather with our families and friends. This is a broad overview, but I'm gonna talk about a few tips for managing stress around the holidays. First and foremost, have a plan. And Brittany will go into many more recommendations in this regard. But some ideas I have would be to bring your own food if possible. Consider alternatives and substitutes, so things that you can bring that may mimic some of the things that your family may have around, but that that is are consistent with how you're managing your IBD. You can consider communicating with the host to learn more about the space, who will be in attendance, etc. And you can also consider hosting. That ship may have sailed for this year because the holidays are so close, but you can always consider hosting, or even having a potluck where everyone brings something, so you don't feel like you're the only person who is bringing their own dish. I'd also recommend to think about your limits ahead of time and not be afraid to advocate for them. So if there's known trigger foods, try to avoid or minimize them, and really prioritize your self-care. The holidays can be a lot for a lot of different reasons, and you might need to take a break to go for a walk or spend private time with a family member or a friend, and that's okay for everyone to do, and particularly when we're managing a chronic health condition. It's a very wise thing to do, just to manage your health. Communication about your IBD. So a lot of people will have anxiety leading up to holidays because they may be wondering, what kinds of questions are going to come up, or if they're going to need to share, if people are going to expect them to share. And so we have to think about, how are we going to communicate? And we can think ahead about how you may want to answer questions that could come up about your health and about your food choices. And at the end of the day, the bottom line really is that it's your choice how much or how little you want to share. But I do think it's good to think about what you want to share ahead of time, so that you don't feel caught off guard if people do have questions for you. And you can consider planning activities separate from the meal to connect with family and friends. So I think it's always a nice reprieve from the food-focused events, and can lead to some really quality time. So seeking more help, I'm putting this up here in part because psychologists are increasingly becoming embedded in gastroenterology offices and across healthcare facilities, including primary care. So we are much more available these days. You can work with your insurance company to find providers that are covered by your insurance, and you can also, look to your GI team to see if they have some recommendations for folks who have knowledge of IBD. And it's all about, finding a clinician who has the knowledge of IBD and gastroenterology in general, and the fit, right? Therapy is about a relationship, so that's super important. I put a couple of websites here that are helpful for searching for providers. The Rome Foundation list is particularly helpful because all of us who specialize in GI are listed here. And so if you're looking for a GI specific psychologist, this is where to go. The APA list is also a more broad one that you can filter exactly what you're looking for. The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation offers a lot of local support groups and lots of other mental health resources on the national website. And you can also consider starting a group of your own. Some of the most powerful support groups I've been a part of have been really started from the ground up by parents or patients. So with that, thank you for listening to this introduction. And I look forward to hearing from everyone else tonight. And up next is Brittany, our dietitian.
Okay. So, well, first off, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic. As someone who's lived with IBD for 20 years, it's truly an honor to speak with you all, and I hope that today's content will be helpful. So my only disclosures are that I have a private practice. So people with IBD can encounter a lot of challenges over the holiday season, such as feeling isolated because of food restrictions or needing to cancel plans last minute, anxiety around eating certain foods for fear they'll trigger symptoms, a lack of confidence in meal selection, and feelings of guilt or shame after eating certain foods. So today I'm hoping to alleviate some of your concerns and clear up some confusion around diet. And I'll be covering a 3-step process to encourage a more enjoyment in eating over the holiday season. I know we're quickly approaching Thanksgiving, but I'm hoping you'll be able to use some of these tips for Thanksgiving as well as the holidays to come. So the 3-step process includes planning, executing, and evaluating. And we're going to be diving into all of these a little bit deeper. So in all reality, the best thing you can do to ensure an enjoyable holiday eating experience is really planning ahead as much as possible so that you can really feel your best going into the holidays. So that includes things outside of nutrition, such as prioritizing stress management activities, sleep quality, and continuing any exercise that you may be doing. In order to plan for the holidays, I recommend getting your care team in place, optimizing your nutrition leading up to the holidays, and developing your day of nutrition plan. So your care team can include your IBD-focused gastroenterologist and registered dietitian, clinical psychologist, surgeon, ostomy nurse, and you can also use social support systems such as the Crohn's and Colitis support groups and even family and friends to help support you over the holidays. But definitely try to reach out to your medical team whenever you notice an increase in symptoms. And they don't have to just be gut-related symptoms. They can also include extra-intestinal manifestations such as fatigue, joint pain, skin issues, mouth sores, eye issues, any of that stuff. Look for opportunities to advocate for yourself, such as requesting blood work if you're experiencing fatigue and maybe haven't been checked for anemia or nutrient deficiencies recently. You can try to schedule your appointments, scopes, or imaging ahead of time, as the holidays can be busy and we don't want your care to be delayed. I also like taking this time of year to collect medical records from that year. So blood and fecal tests from doctors, copies of scope reports and biopsies, imaging, and add it all into a health binder to help stay organized so that if you do go to a doctor or a dietitian, you can just, go ahead and share all that information that they may need. Building a solid foundation leading up to the holidays will help you feel your best before, during, and after the holidays. Instead of focusing on restricting inflammatory foods, try replacing these with healthier but tasty alternatives. So choose well-tolerated anti-inflammatory foods most often. Foods such as lean chicken and turkey, fish, fatty fish, tofu, potatoes, squash, carrots, rice, oatmeal, polenta, nut butters, and olive oil. Minimize added sugars and artificial sweeteners, and instead make your own baked goods sweetened with fruits such as dates, bananas, and applesauce. Replace processed foods with whole foods as much as possible, or choose processed foods made from simple ingredients. For instance, you can get corn chips made with 20 different ingredients you've never heard of before, or you can get corn chips with just the ingredients, corn, oil, and salt. That would be the better choice. If needed, you may need to adjust the texture of foods. So for instance, instead of raw nuts, choosing all natural, smooth nut and seed butters may be better tolerated. Instead of raw fruits and vegetables, cook or blend them. And finally, you may need to use oral nutrition supplements to maintain or gain weight if needed. So to ensure an enjoyable holiday eating plan, I highly recommend developing a day of plan. So this can include testing and adapting cultural or religious holiday recipes, deciding how you'll participate, and planning out your day of nutrition. I truly believe that any recipe can be adapted. It can take some practice to get comfortable with adapting recipes, but when you do, I promise you, it's going to really increase the satisfaction in eating and therefore your enjoyment of really not just the holiday season, but every day. So I kind of put a list together of some common foods you may see during the holidays and some recommendations. So instead of beef brisket, prime rib, or ham, I'd recommend roasting chicken or doing turkey breast, making fish, or maybe just having a smaller amount of the red meat if it's something you really enjoy. Instead of a butter-filled or potato, like a fried potato recipe, maybe swap the butter for a flavored oil, such as garlic-infused olive oil. You could make roasted potatoes, you could air fry latkes, or make mashed sweet potatoes or butternut squash instead. Instead of traditional stuffing, you could hold off on adding sausage, and you could always make a gluten-free version from scratch if you prefer. Or you could swap out butter for olive oil and add in some fresh herbs to add in more flavor. Instead of green bean casserole, you could opt for the whole thing. So just going with, cooked green beans or roasted squash and carrots. There's also usually some type of bread. So instead of that, you could always make it gluten-free if needed. Instead of sugary or fried desserts, either have a small amount of it as is, or you can make an adapted version with less sugar, or swap out the sugar altogether for dates, date syrup, bananas, or applesauce. You can use an air fryer or bake the dessert instead of frying it. And you could always look up a vegan version of the dessert if it contains dairy and you're lactose intolerant. Next, you want to decide how you'll participate. Do you want to host yourself, as this will ensure you'll know all the ingredients in the dishes, but also can be exhausting. You could offer to help host. You could share a safe foods list with the host. You could bring one or more tolerated dish to share, or you could make your own meal and communicate that with the host. In planning out your nutrition for the holiday, I highly recommend skipping meals. Instead, try to stick to your normal eating pattern, because when you skip meals, you'll trigger a primal drive to overeat. Usually when that happens, we just eat what's convenient, which happens to be not the healthiest things, which can exacerbate our symptoms. Also, stick to well-tolerated but satisfying snacks, and maybe even bring some with you. Some examples of simple snacks, but I think satisfying snacks that you could bring might include things like a banana with nut butter, oatmeal with fresh raspberries, or energy balls. If you or your child are on exclusive enteral nutrition or total enteral nutrition, create a plan to distract yourself during the meal while finding a way to still feel included. If you're going to a restaurant, then review the menu ahead of time, talk to the manager about your safe foods list, then decide what you'll eat, and if possible, test it out ahead of time. So the first step for making the holidays enjoyable was to plan, and the next step is to execute. So in order to execute your plan, I think it's important to keep in mind a few things. So enjoying the day, implementing a relaxed approach towards diet, and responding thoughtfully to the food and body police. So before I actually get into the topic of enjoying the day, I do want to cover the difference between trigger, inflammatory, and anti-inflammatory foods, as these are commonly confused terms, and I'm going to be talking about them in a minute. So trigger foods are really foods, any food that triggers your symptoms. And this can include anti-inflammatory as well as inflammatory foods. This is why everyone with IBD needs an individualized diet, as trigger foods often differ from person to a person. Some examples of these may include red meat, cabbage, spicy foods, milk, sugary foods, and raw nuts. Anti-inflammatory foods are foods that increase good gut bacteria, which when consumed over time can lead to conferring a more anti-inflammatory effect on the gut. Some examples of these foods include fruits, vegetables, fatty fish, nuts, seeds, and whole foods instead of processed foods. And finally, inflammatory foods are foods that increase good gut bacteria, which when consumed frequently over time can lead to inflammation. Some examples of these include food additives such as carrageenan and carboxymethylcellulose, artificial sweeteners, red meats like beef, lamb, and pork, processed meats such as lunch meat, sausages, hot dogs, and dairy fat, coconut oil, and palm oil. With that being said, the holidays should be enjoyable, so keep that in mind. I urge you to give yourself some grace during this time. There's really no research, to my knowledge, that suggests a single portion of an inflammatory food triggers active disease. It could trigger symptoms, but we don't have any research suggesting it would trigger immediate inflammation. Therefore, it really is okay for you to consume a dish that you absolutely love, and you're going to get a lot of enjoyment in eating, even if it contains inflammatory foods. It's what your diet looks like overall, and not in a single meal, that makes the biggest difference. And I think that's also why optimizing your nutrition leading up to the holidays is really ideal, because if you do, then you can kind of take a few more liberties on the holiday itself. It's also okay to consume trigger foods, even if you know they'll trigger symptoms, because sometimes the symptoms are worth it. Sometimes in certain situations, they are definitely not worth it, but sometimes they are. There also may be ways to eat foods you normally avoid and still combat symptoms. For instance, if you love mashed potatoes with milk in them, I mean, who doesn't? But you're lactose intolerant, maybe you could take a lactase pill ahead of time so that you could still enjoy the mashed potatoes just as you like them without the side effects. Also, you could talk to your doctor about whether anti-diarrheal pills would be okay to take on the holiday, as this may be another option for you to eat more freely without concern for symptoms. And finally, In order to truly enjoy the day, really try to reject any feelings of guilt or shame after eating certain foods. Just because you have IBD doesn't mean that you don't get to enjoy eating. There was a research study that found 73% of the IBD participants had a drop in their pleasure of eating since their diagnosis, and that really broke my heart. Even if you're in a flare, you don't have to eat a bland diet. In fact, eating bland diets can lead to disordered eating behaviors, so I personally don't recommend it. No, you probably won't tolerate eating a buttery, fried, Paula Deen style diet, but you also don't have to eat boiled chicken and rice. There's definitely a middle ground there, and there's always ways to add in flare-friendly flavor into your diet without triggering symptoms. And this is the holidays, so you deserve to enjoy delicious food just like everyone else. I would highly recommend avoiding implementing restricted diets over the holiday season, unless, of course, it was prescribed by your doctor and you're getting support by an IBD-focused registered dietitian. Instead, listen to your food cravings and find tolerated but tasty adapted cultural recipes to enjoy over the holiday season. Also, even if you're avoiding inflammatory foods, you don't have to have a restrictive mindset around it. Instead, I would encourage you to have a focus more so on trying to have a variety mindset. For instance, instead of removing an inflammatory food such as red meat entirely from your diet, challenge yourself to focus on adding in a lot of different types of protein into your diet. That way you'll naturally eat less red meat because you'll also be consuming salmon, cod, tuna, chicken, turkey, tofu, eggs, tempeh, and maybe even beans if tolerated. Next, I also think it's important to plan how you're going to respond to the food and body police. The food or body police is when anyone, including yourself, comments on your body or your food choices. In my opinion, there's not a lot of situations where it's okay to comment on someone else's body because you never really know what's going on with them. And these comments could really negatively impact how that person feels about their body. But unfortunately, we can't control what other people say to us. So we can prepare ourselves by coming up with responses to comments about our body and food choices that will at least make us feel better about the situation. So for instance, if someone asks you why you're eating differently or maybe pushes certain foods or drinks on you, you could say something like, you know what? Those foods really just don't make me feel good anymore. So I just don't have them. And if someone comments on changes in your body, you could say something like, yeah, my body has changed because of some medical problems I'm dealing with right now. And then just change the subject. These are just a few examples of what you could say, but think about how you want to handle comments like this, as a lot of us do hear comments like this at some point or another, and it could be helpful to feel prepared so that you don't feel like you're on the spot. So the first two steps for making the holidays enjoyable were to plan and to execute. And the final step is to evaluate. I think it's helpful to review how the holiday went and use that information to plan for the next holiday season. So when reviewing the holiday season, remember to do so without judgment. We're really not looking to criticize ourselves here. We just want to be curious about what went well and what you want to change for next time. So you could ask some questions. You could ask yourself some questions such as, how did I feel leading up to the holidays? Did I implement the plan the way I thought I would? Did any obstacles come up? Which foods made me feel the best? Which meals were the most satisfying? What lifestyle behaviors made me feel my best? When planning for the next holiday, consider what you want to keep doing next year and what you want to change. Let's say you adapted a recipe that you really enjoyed. then consider digitizing it and putting it in a note on your phone so that you can use it again next year. If a family member maybe pressured you to eat something you knew would trigger symptoms and you ended up eating it and had symptoms as a result, consider talking to that person ahead of time next year about your trigger foods, or just coming up with how you want to handle a situation like that in the future. The 3 steps for making the holidays enjoyable were to plan, execute, and evaluate. Hopefully the tips I provided you today were useful and will encourage increased satisfaction in eating during the holiday season. Thank you again for inviting me to speak. Next up, I believe we have a food demonstration.
Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Scaviola, and today I'm going to be showing you one of my favorite bisques or soups to make around the holiday season. It's really easy. It goes a long way. People love it, and most importantly, it's really versatile. So not only can you change the ingredients and kind of keep it the same vibe, but you can also add ingredients for other people. So I'll tell you what I mean by this. There's a lot of different uses for this soup. It is a pumpkin carrot bisque. So the ingredients, very easy. Pumpkin and carrots are going to be your first 2 ingredients. However, you can make this however you want. You can substitute the pumpkin for another type of squash, a butternut squash. You can substitute the carrots for maybe a starchier sweet potato. It really is all up to you. So what we do is we start with 6 carrots, onion, and garlic, and we roast it with some oil and salt and pepper. So it's very simple to get the flavor by roasting. You don't always have to boil just to soften your vegetables. I really recommend roasting them because it brings out so much more flavor. And we don't have to compromise flavor just because we may have different food requirements. So the other step is basically to blend it all. We blend it either with a hand blender or a mixer blender. And if you don't have one of these, I highly recommend getting either a hand blender or a mixer blender because it's so much easier when either you're doing like low residue, you just need to give your gut a break and you just want to blend all your food. It's just so much more convenient. So then we blend all the vegetables with stock, more liquid to have a bisque consistency. So what I've done is I put in the roasted carrots, the roasted onions and garlic, and I blended them with just a little bit of chicken stock. So I use chicken stock because it's not only more flavorful for me than vegetable stock, but also it has more protein. You can use bone broth because that also has more protein and a little bit more flavor. So it's a sneaky way to get in protein, even though you're having an all vegetable soup. So I blended it all together and I put this in a pot with the pumpkin because I buy canned pumpkin because I'm lazy and pumpkin is hard to find, I think. So make sure that you get the canned pumpkin. It's not pumpkin spice, so your soup's not going to taste like a pumpkin pie. It's pure pumpkin, but you can sub this for sweet potato or whatever. So you put that in with applesauce. Brittany was just showing us about how that's a great non-artificial sweetener. So applesauce, it's not going to make it sweet. It's not going to taste like apples. It's just going to add that element of balance between that roasted vegetable and the carrot, like the sweetness of the carrots. So this is where I mix in ginger. This is one of my favorite things to add with carrots. If you've never had carrots and ginger together, it's a really great combination. Sometimes I find the ginger a little fibrous if I'm like chewing it, and it doesn't really agree with me. So a really great way around that is to take fresh ginger and just kind of cut off a knob of it and place it in your soup while it's cooking. So you get the flavor of the ginger without having to actually eat the ginger. So it's a little cheat there. And then I have a lot of different spices. I've got turmeric. I eyeball everything. I'm Italian, so I don't measure. And I also have sage. That's a pretty cool holiday flavor. Ground cardamom is also a really nice addition. I think it really helps bring out more of like that brightness of the carrot. And then a little bit of nutmeg. It's not going to taste like pumpkin spice. It just adds like a little bit of like depth, earthy depth to the spices. And this is my favorite part, not only the mixing, but to be able to determine your own consistency. So I can add in as much stock as I want. I usually do about 4 to 5 cups for this recipe, which is ends up being about like 2 cups of roasted vegetables and a can of pumpkin to about 5 cups of stock. And I just put it in and I kind of eyeball it. Sometimes I use a whisk to really like, I'm impatient. So, you know, I just really get it going. And I do this all on heat, medium heat. I bring it to a boil and I just kind of eyeball. And then when it gets to the consistency I like, I stop adding the stock. I save it for later. And that's really it. That's all you have to do. Simmer it for a while. I throw a bay leaf in, another earthy kind of flavor. You want to take that out when you are done. Do not eat bay leaf. We are not supposed to eat bay leaves as human beings, just the flavor. So mix this together, let it simmer for however long you like. I usually leave it for a half hour. You can do 10 minutes. There's no rule for that. I just think the flavors marry a lot better when it's longer. So I keep this on a simmer for about a half hour, and then I serve it, or I freeze it, or I throw it in a slow cooker and I bring it somewhere. So that's why I really like this recipe, is because you can take this as is. I've made this already, cover it, bring it to a friend's house, or if you're having people over, double the batch, and now you have it enough for 10 people. Another thing I like to do is have a little fun with it with a soup bar. So it's a really great way not only to bring the fun with your food, or if you're going somewhere, or if you're hosting, to kind of host the fun, but it's also a really nice distraction from having to talk about the food in a way where we always have to talk about it in a health way. So it really helps us navigate the conversation to, oh, like this, you could eat this, or did you make this because it's the only thing you can eat, or whatever comments you might receive. Instead of receiving those comments and talking about the food in that way, you're scooping out your soup and you're like, oh, what are you going to put in your soup? I don't know. I think I'm going to do a little sour cream. Oh, well, cool. That's cool for you. I'm going to have little croutons. And you just start talking about it in a really fun way. And it becomes a social part of eating, which is what I think is one of the biggest points about eating around the holidays is that social aspect. So putting together a soup bar is a really great way to balance those things and still have fun, and you look like a star because it's a really cool idea. So some of the things you can put in a soup bar are anything from like some sort of a sour cream or non-dairy sour cream. Croutons are a really good one. You couldn't put in like chopped crispy sweet potatoes, like almost like a hash brown sweet potato. You could put that in there. You can leave out some nuts and seeds for people who can have them, and just really make it a really fun experience. So that's why I love a soup bar. I highly recommend it. It's really easy to put together, and it's a lot of fun. And then after, when you're all done, if you have leftovers, which I do not think you will, but if you have leftovers, you can add your leftover turkey, because we all have leftover turkey. You can add your leftover turkey to the soup, and now you have a full meal. So it really is so versatile. You can change any of the ingredients you want. You can bring it anywhere you want. You can freeze it, have it in a couple months. You know, it's such a perfect base recipe that you can have fun with and play around with. So have fun and play around with it. I'm going to turn it right back over to Maggie to complete our discussion.
Thank you so much, Brittany and Laura. And I am loving this soup bar concept. Those were really great presentations. We'll now have two IBD patients share their personal relationship navigating food choices, and then everyone will be available at the end to answer questions during the Q&A section. And as a reminder, please submit your questions through the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible by the end of the night. So next, our first patient story comes from Matt Sr., and then we'll hear from Kelly Adams.
Hello, my name is Matt Sr. I grew up in Arlington, Virginia, but currently reside in Philadelphia. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2015. Growing up in the Southeast, diet is a major part of Southern culture. It is a focal point in every Sunday and momentous occasion in one's life, from birthday parties to weddings, funerals, sporting events, you name it. My culture has always been centered around Southern food staples like fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, black-eyed peas with ham hocks, buttermilk mashed potatoes. The list goes on and on. When I was diagnosed with Crohn's, it felt like I was never going to be able to enjoy this part of my culture ever again. I couldn't eat meat or dairy, these two staples of the Southern diet. However, I'm happy to say with a few workarounds, some research, I have been able to still enjoy the diet I grew up eating in a new way with plant-based replacements for the foods I love. In addition, I am thrilled to report that I have been in remission for 4 years. So that's great news for me. Now I'm going to hand it off to Kelly, who has something to share as well.
Thank you, Matt. That was a great bio. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I've had Crohn's for most of my life, going on 22 years now. And 4 months ago, I made the personal decision to get an ostomy. Unfortunately, in my case, medication, biologics, they just were no longer working for me. And so last year, my colon shrunk and I had a rectal ulcer, and the only kind of solution was an ostomy. So after months and months of debating and questioning, I went through with it, and I feel like I'm relearning my body all over again. I thought I had this Crohn's stuff down, and now I'm a newbie. And a lot of that has to go with food. So my relationship with food beforehand was not the best. I kind of ate to live. I didn't enjoy eating. I had a lot of restrictions. I'm lactose intolerant. I couldn't tolerate a lot of red meat, nuts. It was just every time I would even think about eating, the first question would be, where's the bathroom? Because within halfway through the meal or right after, I would need to run to the toilet, or it would be, what do they have for me? I got pretty good with bringing maybe like cheese I could have or a loaf of bread to different places, but it's just stressful and I didn't enjoy eating. But now that I'm back in Colorado with my family, I'm blessed to have my grandma, who is cooking most of my meals. She's who I grew up with, and she is a Southern grandma. So just like Matt, I grew up with all that wonderful stuff. But 20 years ago, diet was not even in the conversation about Crohn's. They were like, hey, go on this medication. You can eat whatever you want. So I did. It was pretty much just low fiber diet, and then everything else I could eat. Fried chicken, it's not low fiber. Biscuits, not low fiber. Well, not the wheat biscuits at least. So it wasn't until I got older where I had more control of my diet that I kind of changed it around. And that's, again, moving out of my grandma's house, because you don't mess with grandma's recipes. they stayed the way they are, and I've tried to alter things, find my own ways, but my family likes the original way, so that's okay. I'm pretty much in charge of pumpkin pie for the holidays, and that's kind of how I get through them. I alter it for myself, and sometimes I'll trick them into eating them by not telling them what's in it. I've learned that's kind of the best way to go about it, but grandma and my mom, they do the main stuff, the turkey, the stuffing, and that stuff. And this year will be my first holiday, so I'm not sure how I'm going to navigate it. I think having Crohn's for so long, I don't really know if I don't like stuffing or if it just triggers me. So I think I'm just going to go with the approach of sticking with what I know, and maybe trying a little bit of something new. Like I discovered green chili is amazing, and I am so happy that I can at least venture a little bit out into the food world. Not too crazy, but I feel like every couple months I'll try a little something new. So I'm really looking forward to this holiday season and giving some of my family's recipes a try and incorporating more of the great ideas I learned today also into my eating, especially hearing about soup bar. I love that idea, and I would have never even thought of it beforehand. So thank you for inviting me today and sharing your information with me and letting me spread my story today.
All right. Thank you, Matt and Kelly. That was so great to hear from you both. And now I'd like to invite all of our experts and panelists to turn on our cameras and join us so we can take questions from the audience. And just as a reminder to the audience, please submit your questions through the Q&A box, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. Okay. So this first question is for Brittany. Any comments or advice about diet and fatigue issues?
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of people with IBD often do is actually skip meals during the day or eat very small meals for fear of triggering symptoms or needing to go to the bathroom at work and stuff. So that can, although I understand where that's coming from, that can also drop your fatigue or your energy. So definitely having satiating meals. There's tons of things that can go into fatigue. So not just nutrition, but certainly eating like balanced meals. So something with protein, carbohydrate, and a fat in there. Eating regularly throughout the day, eating tolerated fruits and vegetables, staying hydrated, all those things, will definitely help with staying more energized. But also it could be nutrient deficiencies that are contributing to your fatigue, stress, poor sleep quality. There's many factors that can be contributing.
Thank you. Matt and Kelly, do you have anything you want to add just from your perspectives?
I would say my perspective is if you're experiencing symptoms, a good trick of mine to eat beforehand. So you're not really worried about what you can and cannot eat during the event. That's a good one for me. And like everyone said, bring something that everyone can enjoy. So kind of takes the pressure off you in what you can and cannot eat. At least bring some a veggie platter or something to distract pretty much. So I find the distraction is key in just being in a social environment, really.
Yeah, that's great. Relatedly, Laura, everyone's loving the soup bar idea. I'm definitely going to incorporate that into my holiday season. Someone had a thought that to add creamy consistency, you could add coconut milk. Do you have thoughts on that? Is that something you've tried?
If you tolerate it, it's your recipe. That's the beauty of this soup or really any kind of bisque like that is you can play around, maybe switch out one recipe, maybe add in one. I actually tolerate small amounts of dairy pretty well, so I've actually just added cream before, and that works really well, or like a sour cream on top. But a coconut cream or a coconut milk would be wonderful if you tolerate it. Yeah.
Awesome. This question is for Brittany about butter. So do we need to swap out butter in recipes? Is butter that bad?
Well, where that recommendation is coming from is that there was guidelines published early last year, and a bunch of expert IBD gastroenterologists basically came together and looked at all the nutrition research and put together guidelines based on that. There was one thing that they found was that consumption of myristic acids, which includes dairy fats, so butter, coconut oil, and palm oil, when patients consume higher amounts of those, it increased their risk for flares. And that was specifically UC patients in those studies. So that's where that recommendation comes from. That being said, I would probably find adaptions on a day-to-day basis, but then for the holidays, that's where I'm like, just have the real thing, unless you're not going to notice it in the recipe.
Thanks, Brittany. I loved how in your talk you were really balancing the quality of life piece with the food choices you make, right? Like, I love that you said sometimes eating a trigger food is worth it. And I think as a psychologist, I feel like that's what we talk about with our patients all the time, like weighing the cost benefit of trying something.
Yeah. And I think it's also like releasing any guilt or shame that may be associated with eating it. Cause I know myself, in the past when I would have something that I knew would trigger symptoms, but I just wanted whatever it was because I just, had wanted it so badly. I then had feelings of guilt or shame after eating it. And that takes away from the enjoyment and satisfaction in eating. And it's a shame to see that because just because we have IBD doesn't mean we don't get to enjoy food, and have that satisfaction.
Yeah, it's a great message.
Yeah, I really like that part.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no worries. It's just that part really resonated with me because I never realized the trauma I had around food. Like it's like just eating to survive. Otherwise, it was not enjoyable. So like just listening to your part, like I was like, oh God, like I don't even know if I've really dealt with that trauma about it. Like now that kind of I can try new foods, I'm still scared. Like I'm still terrified of like when will I be triggered? And what does that even feel like in my new life now?
Yeah, I mean, food fears are a real thing. And in fact, even 1 in every 4 IBD patients actually have an eating disorder, and even more have disordered eating behavior. So it's prevalent, and the fear of eating food and what that might result in is not an easy thing to overcome. So yeah, be gentle with yourself and know that you're doing your best.
Anyone else before we go to the next question? Okay. This next one is for Brittany and myself, but anyone can comment on it. Someone said that they've read about microbes in the gut impacting mood and the brain. So any comments about best foods for better mood? I'll let you take that first, Brittany and Laura, and any of you. I mean, we're all experts on this here.
Well, I think that's where like the satisfaction in eating comes to play, where, it's so interesting. It's within if, after kind of talking to a client and telling them like, oh, actually you can have some of these foods, this is how you eat them, within a week, I can just visibly see how it's changed their emotions and how much happier they are. So yeah, I definitely understand that. I don't know if I've read any studies specifically on that, to be honest, but anecdotally, I have definitely seen it in clients because food is is enjoyment. It's everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much research out there about this like gut brain axis, and that, 90% of serotonin is actually made in our gut. And the GI tract actually has its own nervous system. So that's where that connection is coming from. And that's why that satisfaction piece is so important about food. So I also haven't read a study about like specific foods that, facilitate production of serotonin, but I think eating things that bring enjoyment and bring yourself joy have that indirect effect on serotonin and therefore mood. So I love that question, but I'm also a nerd about serotonin. So let's see, we got a lot of questions here. Everyone's asking really good ones. Calais, can you talk a bit about how you're working with your ostomy, particularly with respect to expanding your diet? I know this is fresh for you now. You said you're like learning your body. I think folks in the audience would love to hear any tips and tricks.
Sure. I think they start you off with a diet, like your nutritionist kind of tells you like your no-no foods, like peels, nuts, things that can get stuck, things that can cause blockages, because for me, I had my large intestines disconnected, which is an ileostomy. So the hole is a lot smaller. So you want to chew your food really, really well, which kind of, I guess I never thought about how I chewed food, but think about the next time you're like really hungry and you're eating, and like, do you remember eating it? Like, did you accidentally swallow it? Did you take like mouthfuls, or did you properly chew it? So I have to be more cognizant of chewing, cutting things smaller. And then I kind of built from there. So I will maybe try a new food a day, and just see how it fits. So like salads, I wasn't a big salad raw person beforehand, and I'm kind of scared about it now, but I will try like lettuce. I'll cut it up and I'll try like a little bit of it on a taco or on something like that, and I'll see how I fare. And you can kind of feel a little bit if maybe you're going a little too hard, or at least I think like my stomach will feel a little bit of pressure, and I'll be like, okay, maybe I like ate too much, or maybe I need to be a little careful with what I had then. Drinking water helps things go down for me. And then I think it's kind of just like your comfort level. There are still things like mushrooms, they don't really digest. And I think corn, I may never eat those again. I didn't really like them beforehand, but I do follow a lot of other ostomates on Instagram who do eat these foods and kind of do well. So it's just, I think it's best to take baby steps until I feel more comfortable with those things. And for me, I could live without corn. So it's not a big thing for me not to have it, but I really kind of wanted to incorporate more vegetables into my diet. So that's kind of how I'm going about it right now.
That's great. Thanks, Calais. This question's for Calais and Matt. How do you cope with stress around your diet, meal planning, and family gatherings?
How do I cope? I think the benefits for me for being back in Colorado is everybody kind of knows, all my friends, they've been my friends since high school or college, so they know what I can and can't eat. Or if we have a gathering, they reach out to me and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about making lasagna. Can you have that? And I'm comfortable enough with them that I can say like, no, I can't have that. I'm sorry. I can bring something else if you still want to make it. Or so I think it's just the trust I've built with my family and friends. And now being older too, I can exactly show my grandma like, here, you want to try this recipe for fried chicken? Like, I know baked fried chicken isn't the same, but maybe let's try it this way today. Or I'll make it. And sometimes she likes it, and sometimes she's like, well, you make that for you, and I'll do it my way. In new situations, I'm still trying to figure that out because I'm still fresh with an ostomy, and I haven't gone to and there's been the pandemic, so we haven't really done a lot of gatherings. So I'm still kind of trying. I still don't know how I'm going to navigate that. Beforehand, I would probably eat beforehand and kind of just like not eat. but I want to enjoy it this time. Like, I'm tired of being in the corner, kind of silently starving inside because I'm terrified of eating everything. So I'm hoping that I can venture out a little bit more going forward in my journey.
And I would say for myself, my social network has been pretty small during the past 2 years during COVID. And most of my network is like mainly family and some few of my close friends. And they all sort of know what I can and cannot eat. And they also know that they can eat whatever they want. So I think that's important for them to know as well. But I found it really interesting because my partner's grandmother, who just turned 91 years old, has basically like eats whatever we put in front of her. So I've been able to introduce her to a lot of plant-based options, which I find really exciting because most of the times she doesn't know what's like real meat or what's like an impossible or like a veggie burger or whatever. So I find it like really sort of fun to like experiment with like plant-based alternatives that essentially mimic meat or not in like a fake way, but are healthier and just like healthier for mind and body and still really taste delicious.
Yeah, that's great. Laura, I'd love your perspective on this too. Like ways, tips and tricks for managing family gatherings and like modifying recipes, any ideas you have.
Yeah, I think, family gatherings, I think, to what we're talking about now is maybe almost a little easier because a lot of us, I think, tend to, if we're telling anyone about our adaptions or our issues, it's our family, it's our closest people. And so they tend to understand, and they're the ones that are going to say, hey, what can you have? Or is there a recipe that I can make for you? Or, how can we accommodate you? And I find it to be maybe the acquaintances, like you're a guest of someone at a party or a gathering, or coworkers who no one really knows, even that you have IBD. So in those situations, I think it is purely social. And it's like, that's kind of my point with the whole soup bar is like the distraction of it. You bring your own food or you bring, the veggie platter, a distraction, and you kind of feel it out by conversation and socially. One of the best ways I like to kind of avoid that is to just hold something. So if you're at like a potluck with coworkers or a party or something, just hold some drink. It could be water, and less people will ask you why you're not eating, or are you going to eat that because you have this like safety beverage. So I guess deflection is my strongest. I don't know if that's good advice, but some tips for deflection at the very least.
Yeah.
That's great. Deflection is great. It's a powerful tool in many situations. Does anyone have any tips on travel around the holidays when you have specific dietary restrictions? That's for everyone.
I just got on a plane earlier this week, which was fun because I was like, oh, is my thing gonna expand or what? And generally, even before and after, I don't like to eat before plane rides just because, I don't know, there's something about being in the air, gurgles my stomach. It's just not a good feeling for me. So I try to eat maybe 2 hours before my flight so that I'm not starving. I'm just comfortable. And then if I'm gonna eat anything on the plane, I just go for water, no carbonation, no bubbles. And I've seemed to do pretty well with airplanes that way before and after surgery. Just keep it simple, try not to complicate it with like soda or fast food beforehand.
That's great advice. Anyone else?
I know one of my go-tos is I actually make like a loaded oatmeal, which you kind of have to make it a little more on the thicker side and not watery so you can get it through security. But as long as it's like a thick, which I know for some people it might be disgusting, but for me, I'm okay with it because then it's something that I can eat. And I know my family lives on the East Coast, so I do those long flights. So I need something on, I don't know how some people go without eating that whole time, but I need something to eat. So I always bring that, and I make like a lot of it so I can have it kind of throughout the flight whenever I get hungry. And I might bring some other snacks of, a banana or, fruit and nut butter and things like that, where maybe energy balls that are tolerated, things that you've had before. And yeah, I would say I also go with like water and making sure that I'm still hydrated too, because if you're dehydrated, that's just always going to mess up, your system. And then while you land, things are always going to get off track in terms of your symptoms. So I know people don't like going to the bathroom in those little airplane bathrooms, but just drink your normal amount of water, and that way you can be hydrated and feeling your best when you're landing.
Anyone else?
I just think the main thing is to try to maintain consistency in your schedule as best as possible. So just kind of knowing when you normally eat and trying to replicate that, whether it just be a smaller portion of a snack that you bring. I think just keeping the schedule will keep you on track so that when you get to your destination, you're not all out of whack, and you can enjoy wherever you're going. So that's my only tip.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. Brittany, is coconut oil detrimental and a trigger for IBD?
So coconut oil is myristic acid. So that is included in that study where UC patients, the UC patients who consume the most myristic acids, which includes coconut oil, were 3 times more likely to flare than those who consume the least amount. So that's really the amount, but notice how it's not detrimental. I wouldn't use that word, only because it's talking about over a 6-month time frame. Those who consumed it the most, maybe on a daily basis or multiple times a day, but you can have coconut oil in something that you really know you're going to enjoy here and there, and that's going to be fine. Again, it's what your diet looks like as a whole, rather than, having a little bit of coconut oil in a baked good that you really enjoy here and there.
Great. Laura, do you have anything else to add to that?
That was well said. I think if we're looking for alternatives, high heat, like coconut oil usually is great for high heat. So if you're like roasting something at a high temperature or like frying something or whatever, coconut oil is a good option for that. But if you're looking for an alternative option that's a little bit safer, there are other vegetable oils that work well for high heat. I use avocado oil that works really well for high heat, and I just like the flavor a little bit more. So those are some high heat alternatives. There's also, you could just do like butter or ghee. They tolerate up to like 500 degrees or more. So that's a good alternative.
Great. Who knew that different oils were used for different things? I'm learning a lot. There are questions about stress management techniques. So I would love to hear if everyone wants to go around and share like one of their go-to strategies for managing stress.
I can start if that's all right. My first is a nap. I am a nap queen. If I get too stressed out or overwhelmed, I will take a nap and like 2 hours minimum. But that's just like my body. It's probably like I'm stressed and fatigued. But my second is I really like to just kind of like transport myself to other worlds. And I do that through a book, comic, just like web comics are like, I feel like blowing up. So anything kind of like just like with pictures, so I can pretend I'm the character for a while. That's mainly how I got through school, flares, all that stuff is like a nap and then like a good book. Don't talk to me for 2 hours.
That's great. Thanks, Kelly.
I would say for myself, over the past few years, I mentioned exercise was like a big factor in my life. I run. Over the past few years, I've found listening to music and just like going on a run allows me to like separate myself from everything. And just like sort of be in my own world and just like put everything else aside. The stresses of working, family, relationships, whatever. I'm just by myself doing that thing and listening to my music and just like being in my own world. So that's really helps me quite a bit, actually. So I would say definitely exercising, running is a big part of my routine now.
Awesome. Thank you. Or Brittany, do you have something you want to share?
I know I have exercised my whole life, and that's definitely something that I feel like helps with the stressors of that day. But I learned for me, it didn't seem to help me build up or like change how I approach stressful situations. So I started meditating every day 4 years ago, and oh my gosh, like what a life-changing thing. Like I really wish that every time that someone went in a flare, they wrote you, whatever a script for whatever medication that they did, but also a script for meditation or stress management, because it was like so life-changing. Sometimes I feel like I need to do it like 2-3 times a day. I feel best. But it's just really changed my life, and how I approach stressful situations is very different than how I used to. And I think that's because of the stress, because of the meditation. Whereas when I used to exercise regularly, it really helped me feel better that day, but I would still get like irritated by things and approach things in the not the best way. So yeah, this has been really helpful for me. And the other thing that I would say that is helpful is kind of like in emergency moments or times that I'm just like my thoughts are racing at night, is doing diaphragmatic breaths and just like taking deep belly breaths. And that really helps me relax my body and kind of, get back into my body and be able to relax and move on with my day or be able to fall asleep.
I'm the worst one to ask about managing stress. I will admit it. I'm still working on it. It is still something. By the time I get through my 30s, I think maybe I will have tried to have one default. But I mean, never underestimate a good playlist. I think that's a really great way to kind of get yourself, either out of your own head or into a space in your head that you really need to be in. But I think for me personally, a lot of times when I get stressed, especially around the holidays, it tends to just spiral. And I feel like I somehow need to take the burden because everyone else is really busy too. So reminding myself that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay. You're not going to be a burden. If you ask somebody to help you, it's nice, right? When somebody asks you for help, you feel privileged and you feel like, yeah, I'm going to help you. Thank you for asking. thinking of that feeling for other people when I ask for help is what I try to do. So we'll see how this season goes, but we'll see how well I do.
No, I think that's a great tip. Ask for help.
Yeah.
It is hard to do. Some people like having like a person tell them what to do to relax. So if you're one of those people, you can try an app on your phone. My favorite is Headspace, and it's a relatively interactive app. So if people out there like having, a script, and the idea is that you don't need the guided, relaxation tools forever. You learn them that way and then can use them on the go. So I think that's always a handy tool. All right. Anyone else want to add something before we go to the last question? Okay. All right. So what meal is everyone looking forward to this holiday season? I'm going to make a soup bar. That's my answer to that question.
Good choice.
Dessert.
Did you say what was the question? I didn't hear.
What meal is everyone looking forward to for the holidays?
I feel like dessert. So I'm weird. I don't actually like turkey at all. So my favorite part of Thanksgiving is pumpkin pie because it's the only time of the year I eat it. And I make it myself so that I can eat it. And it just means fall to me. It's like cozy and spicy. And, just thinking, I was like, I wonder if I should make a practice pie before Thanksgiving, just because I've been in the mood. And I used to get my fix from the Starbucks drink, but I can't drink it anymore because it has dairy, I guess, secret dairy. So I really want my pumpkin pie.
I support you in making a practice pie.
I'm looking forward to pies because cakes and whatever else is loaded with the dairy, but I find pies are not so dairy laden, or they can not be. And I recently, last week, I was making a macaroni and cheese, which uses sweet potatoes. So I think I'm gonna make that again because this was my first time making it since the previous holiday season. So it turned out really well this time. So yes, just interesting finding different recipes that include foods that I did love, and discovering new ways to make those foods again. So there's always many options out there. You just gotta do some digging, but most times you can find different recipes to meet your specific needs, I guess.
I know for me, I always look forward to stuffing, mashed potatoes, and dinner rolls. I love those. I also don't like turkey. I'm also a semi-vegetarian, so I'll probably be doing white beans or something on the side. But really, it's those three that I come to the Thanksgiving table for. And then I was actually thinking about making some sort of walnut maple cashew ice cream from scratch.
Ooh.
So I'm hoping, we'll see. I'm going to be testing some recipes this weekend to find a good one for the day of, but I'm crossing my fingers for it.
I volunteer to taste it.
If you need any help, you put together an ice cream bar, I'll bring the soup bar. You got it all covered.
Exactly.
And so I guess for me, we are doing a little something different this year for Thanksgiving, and we're going out to eat for the first time, maybe the second time in my life. So I usually look forward to kind of recreating or just creating traditional recipes from my grandmother that used to do Thanksgiving. But this year, you know, we've all had a year. We're gonna go out to eat. So
Yes.
I'm just looking forward to seeing maybe there's a new item that I'll add for next year's Thanksgiving dinner.
That's great. Well, thanks everyone. This has been so fun. I really appreciated hearing everyone's perspectives on all things holidays and managing IBD. So that's it. And Renat, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. I am definitely hungry after that last question. There was so much great information shared throughout this evening. Thank you so much to our expert faculty and panelists for sharing your knowledge and answering all of these amazing questions from our audience. Before we end, I just want to remind everyone, those looking for Laura's recipe, it is in the swap card platform under documents and links, so you can find it there. And please fill out the evaluation survey that will be available for tonight's program. We really appreciate the feedback and it will help us plan for future programming. Before we say good night, we would like to invite you to view your local chapter's upcoming events on either the foundation website or their social media page. We again want to thank our sponsors, Gilead, Janssen, Takeda, and Bristol Myers Squibb for their support. And we hope to see you at our next webinar, which will be on December 16th. And the topic is what it means to feel well with IBD. Thank you so much and have a great evening.